If you could float far outside the solar system tonight and look back at it from the side, almost everything you know would vanish into a single thin line of light. 8 planets, hundreds of known moons, more than 1 million asteroids, every world humanity has ever named. All of it pressed into a sheet, so flat it barely seems real. Our whole cosmic neighborhood, seen from the edge, looks like a sheet of paper the size of a city. And above that sheet, nothing. No traffic, no worlds, just clean, open, empty space, running on forever in every direction. Now hold that picture next to a strange fact. In almost 70 years of spaceflight, human beings have launched thousands of machines off this planet. We have sent them to every planet in the sky. We have flown them into the clouds of Jupiter, through the rings of Saturn, and so close to the sun that their heat shields glow. And in all that time, with all those machines, we have never simply aimed one straight up, out of the sheet, into all that beautiful open room. Except once. One spacecraft in history was built to fly above the sun, and on the day it finally got its chance, it did the strangest thing any sun mission has ever done. It turned its back on the sun, and it ran. It flew away from its own target for 16 months. Nearly 1 billion kilometers, in what looks like exactly the wrong direction. Tonight is the story of why that was the only road up. Why the emptiest direction in the solar system is also the most expensive one. And why the reason has been riding along with you every single day of your life, without you ever once feeling it. Think back to the model of the solar system you grew up with. Maybe it hung from the ceiling of your 4th grade classroom. Styrofoam balls on bent coat, hanger wire. Maybe it stretched across 2 pages of a library book, or filled a hallway in a science museum, with the sun glowing at one end and the planets strung out in a tidy row. Every one of those models shared one quiet feature that nobody ever stopped to mention. They were flat. The planets sat in a single line, side by side, like beads laid out on a table. You could be forgiven for assuming that was laziness. Space is 3-dimensional, after all, and a classroom ceiling is not. Surely the real solar system scatters its planets in every direction around the sun, above it and below it and off at every angle. And the flat model is just the cheap version of the truth. The flat model is the truth. That is the first surprise of the night. Take the actual, measured orbits of all 8 planets. The real paths they trace around the sun year after year. And compare them. They line up. Each planet circles the sun in very nearly the same plane as all the others, tilted from its neighbors by only a few degrees. Astronomers call this shared surface the ecliptic. But the name matters less than the picture. Shrink the entire solar system, all the way out to Neptune, until it fits inside a football stadium. And every planet we have ever known would spend its whole orbit gliding within a few feet of the grass. The Sun sits at midfield. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. All of them skim across that 100-yard field like pucks on an air hockey table, and none of them ever climbs as high as the first row of seats. The stadium above them soars up and away, row after row, level after level, all but empty. Now, before we go one step further, let us be honest about one thing, because it matters for everything that follows. Out in deep space, there is no true up. An astronaut floating between the stars feels no ceiling above her head and no floor beneath her boots. Words like up and down are gifts from living on a planet where gravity gives every one of us the same reference point. The universe as a whole never signed that agreement, but the solar system did. The moment you see our neighborhood as a flat sheet, that sheet hands you a perfectly good compass. There is the plane where all the planets live. There is the direction along the plane, which is where every world and nearly every machine we have ever built spends its existence. And there is the direction straight out of the plane, at a right angle to all that traffic, pointing into the empty seats of the stadium for the rest of tonight. When I say up, that is exactly what I mean. Perpendicular to the floor, out of the sheet, away from the crowd. Why is there a floor at all? The short version is that the solar system was born this way, 4.5 billion years ago. Before there were planets, there was a single enormous cloud of gas and dust. And that cloud was turning. As gravity pulled it inward, the spin took over, and the cloud did what nearly every spinning thing in the universe does. It flattened. A ball of tumbling chaos smoothed itself out into a wide, thin, orderly disk. The way a lump of pizza dough spreads into a flat circle under a spinning toss. The sun lit up at the center of that disk. The planets grew out of the leftovers, assembling themselves from dust grains inside the disk itself, which means the planets never chose to line up. They were born on the floor. Every last one of them. And 4.5 billion years later, they are still gliding along the same level where they first opened their eyes. There will be more to say about that disk later tonight, because its story hides one final twist that we are saving for the end. For now, just hold the shape in your mind. I like to picture it as a vinyl record. A big black album spinning silently in the dark, wider than the mind can hold. The grooves are the orbits. The planets are dust grains riding those grooves, around and around, each one locked to its track. The record has been spinning since before the Earth had a surface, and it has never once wobbled off its table. So this is the map we start with. A disk, a floor, a neighborhood flatter than almost anything humans have ever built, floating inside an ocean of room, and a civilization of curious, restless, rocket-building creatures standing right in the middle of it, looking up at all that open space directly overhead. The solar system has no ceiling, but it does have a floor plan, and every machine we have ever launched has lived its whole life inches above the floor. Let me show you what I mean by that. Because when you actually take inventory, it becomes one of the strangest patterns in the entire space age. Start the roll call with the famous ones. In 1977, we launched the twin Voyagers, and they became the greatest travelers our species has ever produced. They visited Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and then kept going, out past the edge of the sun's bubble, into the space between the stars. In 2006, we launched New Horizons, which crossed 3 billion miles of empty road and gave us our first real look at Pluto's frozen heart. Cassini spent 13 years living at Saturn, diving between the rings. Juno is circling Jupiter right now, skimming the cloud tops of the largest storm system in the solar system. The Parker Solar Probe has flown closer to the sun than any machine in history, moving faster than any object human hands have ever built, brushing through the sun's outer atmosphere itself. Add the fleets at Mars, the orbiters at Venus and Mercury, the armada of telescopes and relay stations, and the family portrait of human spaceflight starts to look genuinely magnificent. Thousands of machines, billions of miles, every planet in the sky, visited. Now do the one thing nobody ever does with that glorious list. Take every mission I just named And instead of admiring where each one went, plot all of their paths together and look at the picture from the side. From the edge, the way we looked at the solar system in the opening minutes of tonight, the picture collapses. All of it. The entire golden age of exploration flattens into that same thin line. Voyager, crossing the orbits of 4 planets. New Horizons, running its 3 billion-mile marathon. Parker screaming past the sun at record speed. Seen from the edge. Every single one of those journeys is a crawl across the floor. Outward, inward, around and around. Faster and slower. Near and far. And always pressed against the same flat sheet. We built the fastest machines in human history and then drove nearly every one of them across the same level surface. Like race cars that never once left the parking garage. Even the missions that sound like exceptions mostly are not. New Horizons had to reach Pluto. And Pluto is famous for having a tilted orbit, angled about 17 degrees off the floor. 17 degrees sounds like a real climb. It is barely a ramp. The spacecraft left Earth riding the floor like everything else, and simply met Pluto at the spot where Pluto's tilted path happened to swing near the plane. The mountain did not require climbing. The mountain leaned down. And then there are the 2 strange exceptions in that whole inventory. And they happen to be brothers, the Voyagers again. After Voyager 1 made its last planetary stop at Saturn in 1980, the encounter flung it onto a path that rises out of the plane at roughly 35 degrees. And it has been climbing gently above the floor for over 4 decades. Voyager 2 finished its own grand tour at Neptune in 1989. And that final flyby threw it the opposite way, pitching it down below the plane, where it has been sinking deeper into the southern dark ever since. One brother tilted up, one brother tilted down. But notice how they earned those angles, because this is the detail that matters. Neither spacecraft ever turned its own engines toward the empty seats of the stadium. The planets threw them. Each one flew close past a giant world. And the giant world's gravity grabbed its path and bent it. The way a strong hand redirects a thrown ball. Their tilts were not purchases. They were parting gifts, handed out by Saturn and Neptune on the way to the exits. Hold on to that detail. File it away somewhere safe. A planet can throw a spacecraft in a direction the spacecraft could never afford to go on its own. And it has already happened twice. That single fact is going to return later tonight and take over this entire story. So here is where the inventory leaves us. Almost 70 years. Thousands of launches. The greatest engineering effort our species has ever mounted. And the grand total of humanity's progress in the up direction is a pair of probes drifting at partial angles because giant planets happened to shove them. And one other spacecraft. The mysterious one from our opening, whose story we have not touched yet. Nothing in 70 years has ever simply aimed at the open sky above the solar system and flown there. You might reach for the obvious explanation. Maybe nobody ever thought of it. Maybe the people who planned these missions were so busy aiming at planets that the empty space overhead simply never crossed their minds. I promise you that is backwards. The people who design space missions are the biggest dreamers this civilization produces. They have proposed missions to interstellar comets, missions to the far side of the sun, missions that would take longer than their own careers and their own lifetimes. Flying up, out of the plane, to look down on the solar system from above, is one of the oldest dreams in the field. Scientists have wanted a bird's-eye view of the sun since before the space age began. The idea has been sitting on the table, in plain sight, for the better part of a century. They were never missing the imagination. Every serious space agency on Earth has looked at the empty room above the solar system and asked what it would take to send a machine up there. Then each one of them sat down, worked through the same short chain of arithmetic, and quietly set the idea aside. Whatever they found in those numbers was heavy enough to ground the entire dream for decades. With the hard-won exceptions you will meet tonight. That arithmetic is where we are headed next. And I should warn you now, the problem it reveals sits closer to home than anything out in space. It has nothing to do with distance, nothing to do with the sun's gravity. The wall between us and the open sky above the solar system is not out there someplace among the planets. It is in this room. It is under your bed, under your floor, under your entire hometown. And it has been moving every second of your life. Because the real reason we cannot fly up is that you, right now, tonight, are already flying sideways. Absurdly, unstoppably, magnificently sideways. And in the next chapter, I am going to show you exactly how fast, wherever you are right now. Get comfortable, because I want to tell you what your body is actually doing tonight. You feel perfectly still. The bed holds you. The room stands quiet around you. And nothing anywhere seems to be moving, except maybe the slow turn of your thoughts. Every instinct you own reports the same verdict. You are at rest. Your instincts are lying to you on a scale that is almost funny. As you lie there, the Earth is carrying you around the sun, and it is not strolling. The planet under your bed is moving at 30 kilometers every second. Say it in American terms, and it sounds even less believable. About 19 miles per second. Roughly 67,000 miles per hour. In the time it took me to say that sentence, you traveled farther than most people drive in a week. You will cross more than 2.5 million kilometers of space tonight while you sleep. And you will wake up convinced you never left the room. You have never once felt it. And there is a good reason. You only ever feel changes in motion, never motion itself. Think about the last time you flew on a plane. Once the climb leveled off, you stood up. You walked the aisle. You poured a cup of coffee without a drop spilled. And your body swore you were standing still in a long, narrow room. Meanwhile, that room was tearing through the sky at 500 miles per hour. The coffee came with you. The air in the cabin came with you. Everything aboard shared the plane's motion so perfectly that the motion disappeared. Now scale the plane up to the size of a world. The Earth is the smoothest ride ever built. No turbulence. No engine noise. No seatbelt sign. Just a planet coasting through vacuum in a silence so complete that its passengers spent most of their history certain it was standing still. Here is why this matters to our story. And it matters more than anything else I will say tonight. When we launch a rocket, we launch it off the deck of that moving ship. The rocket spends its whole existence before launch as a passenger, sharing the Earth's 30 kilometers per second, the same way your coffee shares the airplane's speed. And at the moment of liftoff, when the engines light and the tower falls away, that inherited motion does not stay behind on the pad. It rides along. Every kilogram of that rocket crosses into space, already moving sideways at 30 kilometers every second. A speed it never asked for, never earned, and cannot refuse. The engines never gave it that velocity. The Earth did, and the Earth does not take returns. Once you see that, some famous television footage starts to look very different. Picture the launches you grew up watching. A Saturn V climbing off the pad on a pillar of flame. A shuttle rising through Florida morning air. A Falcon lifting off in a live stream. In every one of those pictures, the rocket is doing the same thing. Going straight up. Fighting gravity. Aimed at the sky like an arrow at the ceiling. That image is the whole reason the question of this video feels so natural. Of course, rockets can fly up. We have all watched them do it 100 times. Watch about 1 minute longer, though, and every one of those rockets betrays the image. Not long after clearing the tower, quietly and deliberately, each one begins to lean. The arrow tips over. The climb bends into a curve. The curve flattens toward the horizon. And by the time the rocket vanishes from view, it is flying nearly parallel to the ocean below it, screaming eastward, gaining far more speed than height. Flight controllers even have a name for the moment the vehicle starts the tip. And they say it out loud on every broadcast while the whole world hears it and nobody wonders. Pitching downrange, rolling onto its back and running for the horizon. The vertical part of a launch is nothing but an escape from air. The lower atmosphere is thick soup. And a rocket punches straight up, simply to get above the drag as fast as possible. That takes about a minute. After that, the real job begins. And the real job of every orbital rocket ever flown is horizontal speed. To stay in orbit around the Earth, a spacecraft needs to be moving sideways at nearly 8 kilometers per second. Fast enough that as gravity pulls it down, the curve of the planet falls away beneath it at the same rate. Height alone buys you nothing up there. Climb straight up 200 miles with no sideways speed, and you will hang for a moment at the top of the arc. And then you will fall straight back down like a stone dropped from a tower. Because that is what you are. Orbit is not altitude. Orbit is velocity. Ask any launch engineer in the country, and they will tell you the same thing. Getting to space is easy. Staying in space means going sideways. Brutally fast. So, look at what our species has actually been practicing for 70 years. Every satellite over your head right now is a master of horizontal motion. Every crew that ever reached a space station got there by leaning over and gunning it eastward. Every deep space probe we have ever dispatched began its journey by adding its rocket's push on top of Earth's mighty sideways glide, stacking speed on speed. All of it in the plane of the floor. We are a civilization of virtuoso sideways flyers. It is the one direction we have truly mastered. And it is the one direction that owns us completely. Because now put the two pieces of tonight together and feel how the trap closes. Chapter 1 showed you a solar system shaped like a spinning record. Every planet locked to its groove on a flat disk. This chapter shows you that the Earth is one of those grooves. And that everything on this planet, you, me, every rocket we have ever fueled, is racing along that groove at 30 kilometers every second. Sideways, a spacecraft on a launch pad is not a bird sitting calmly on a branch, free to fly wherever it pleases the moment it spreads its wings. It is a passenger on a bullet train, already doing full speed down a track it never chose. And its mighty engines, the most powerful machines our species knows how to build, amount to a set of legs that can jump from the train car. How far can those legs jump? Here is the honest number. And it should land with a thud. The most capable rockets ever flown. The giants. The ones we reserve for our proudest missions. They can give a deep space probe a push of roughly 10 to 15 kilometers per second beyond Earth. Call it 15 on a spectacular day. The train is doing 30. Our best jump, the absolute summit of human rocketry, is half the speed of the track we are already riding. The inheritance outweighs the effort 2 to 1. And there has never been a machine on Earth for which that was not true. 2 to 1. Keep that ratio in your pocket. Because in the next chapter, we are finally going to do the thing everyone watching this video has been waiting to do. We are going to take a spacecraft, point it straight up out of the plane of the solar system, right at all that empty open room, and light the engine. You already know enough to suspect it will not go where we aim it. What you probably do not suspect is how strange, and how stubborn, and how nearly beautiful the failure is about to be. Let us build the ship. Money is no object tonight, so give it everything. The biggest rocket ever assembled. Tank upon tank. Engine upon engine. Give it a proud name. Something with ambition in it. Ascent. And give it a mission statement 1 sentence long. The same sentence this whole video is built on. Fly straight up, out of the plane of the solar system, perpendicular to the floor, and just keep going. For clarity, we will call that direction north, the way astronomers loosely do, up out of the disk on the same side as Earth's own North Pole. Our ship clears the atmosphere, coasts free of Earth's gravity, and arrives on the open floor of the solar system with its tanks nearly full. Now comes the moment. The ship swings its nose away from the sun, away from the planets, away from every road ever traveled, and points at the empty north. The stadium seats, the clean dark, engines to full power, and the ship rises. Let me say that plainly, because it surprises people. Nothing stops it. There is no invisible ceiling over the solar system, no barrier, no wall of force pressing down. The engine burns. The ship accelerates northward, and northward it goes. Click after click, exactly as commanded. If you were aboard, you would watch the planet's flat neighborhood begin to fall away beneath you, and you would be certain, absolutely certain, that you were escaping. Now, come stand outside with me, somewhere out in deep space, where we can watch the whole board at once. Because from out here, the picture looks nothing like it does from the cockpit. From out here, we can see what the pilot has forgotten. The ship left Earth, and Earth handed it the family inheritance. 30 kilometers every second. Sideways. That motion did not switch off when the nose swung north. It never switches off. There is no air out there to rub against. No friction. Nothing for the old speed to drain into. So while the engine faithfully builds new speed toward the north, the old speed keeps right on, carrying the ship sideways around the sun. Undiminished. Like a current under a swimmer. The ship is not doing one motion. It is doing two at once. The climb it is buying and the orbit it inherited. And what it actually travels is the combination, a long diagonal, up and sideways together. Run the tape forward a few months and watch what that diagonal becomes. The ship climbs north, high above the floor of the solar system. But the whole time, the sun's gravity is quietly pulling at it, patient and unhurried. And the inherited sideways motion keeps bending its path around the sun, the way it bends every path around the sun. The climb slows. The curve tightens. The ship coasts up over the top of its arc, hangs there above the plane of the planets, and then comes gliding back down. Crossing the floor it worked so hard to leave, sinking below it into the southern dark, swinging under the sun, and rising again on the far side, around and around. Our escape ship has not escaped anything. It has simply traded its old flat orbit for a new tilted one. A great slanted hoop around the sun, forever climbing above the disk and forever sinking back through it. Twice per lap, like a carousel horse that can never leave the carousel. The ship went above the planets. It never stopped going around the sun. And that distinction, right there, is the single most important idea in tonight's story. So let us give it one clean minute. There are two completely different things a spacecraft can turn, and the universe charges wildly different prices for them. The first is its nose. Turning the nose is nearly free. Small thrusters, a puff of gas, a few seconds of patience, and a spacecraft can spin to face any direction it likes. The way you can turn your head while riding a bicycle. The second is its path. The actual direction the ship as a whole is moving through space. The orbit itself. Turning that means fighting the ship's own momentum. Every ton of it. Moving at interplanetary speed. Your head turns for free. The bicycle turns by leaning and braking and burning energy. And the faster you ride, the more the turn costs. Pointing the nose north took our ship a few seconds and a whisper of fuel. Turning the path north is the entire war. And momentum concedes nothing without payment in full. Which brings us to the stubborn, nearly beautiful failure I promised you. Because right about now, a very reasonable objection should be forming in your mind. Fine. The old sideways motion keeps dragging us into an orbit. But we have an engine, and the engine makes new speed as long as we feed it. So feed it. Keep burning north. Pile up so much northward velocity that the ship's motion becomes almost entirely climb and hardly any orbit. Drown the inheritance. Surely, with enough fuel, brute force wins in the end. So let us run the fantasy all the way out. Strike the word budget from the mission. Give Ascent a magic tank. Bottomless. Weightless. Impossible. And let it burn straight north for as long as we please. Watch the numbers as the burn goes on. The northward speed climbs past 10 kilometers per second. Past 30. Past 100. The path tilts steeper and steeper away from the floor. The old orbit stretches taller and narrower. The ship spearing farther above the plane with every passing month. 45 degrees of tilt. 60. 80. The dream appears to be working. Then look closer at the last stretch of the dial. Because something eerie is happening there. 85 degrees. 88. 89. 89.9. The needle keeps crawling toward the mark that means truly vertical. Perpendicular. Straight up and nothing else. It crawls forever. It never arrives. And it never will. No matter how long we burn. And the reason is so simple, it stings. A perfectly vertical path is a path with zero sideways motion in it. Nothing left over. Not a meter per second. But our northward engine has been building northward speed this entire time and doing nothing whatsoever about the sideways speed. Which is still there. All 30 kilometers per second of it. Untouched. Patiently tilting every diagonal we draw. We have been adding to one side of the ledger and ignoring the debt on the other. You can stack new motion on top of old motion until the stars burn out. And the old motion will still be in the mix. Still bending your straight line into a slant. Straight up, it turns out, is not a direction you can fly toward. It is a direction you have to settle a debt for. The only road to a truly vertical path runs through an act our ship has been avoiding all chapter. Turning the engine against the inheritance itself and killing the sideways motion. Kilometer per second. By kilometer per second. All 30 of them. Down to zero. Power alone cannot do it. And patience cannot either. As long as both are pointed the wrong way. Nothing works except paying the debt. So, the real bill for flying up has 2 lines on it. And we have been pretending there was only one. Build the climb. Yes. But first, cancel the ride. And the moment you sit down to price those 2 lines together, honestly, in cold numbers, you arrive at one of the great sticker shocks in all of spaceflight. That bill is the next chapter. And I will tell you now, it is worse than you are guessing. It is worse than almost anyone guesses. Before we open that bill, we need to clear away one last piece of bad furniture. Because I know what a lot of you are picturing right now, and I understand why. Watching our ship Ascent climb above the plane, stall, and come sliding back down through the floor of the solar system. It is almost impossible to avoid a certain mental image. The image of a ball thrown into the air. The ship rose. Gravity caught it. Gravity dragged it back down to the level where it belongs. Seen that way, the flat solar system starts to feel like a kind of surface. A sticky table. A sheet with its own downward pull. And flying up starts to feel like fighting the same fight every jumping child on Earth has ever fought. Jump all you want. The floor always wins. That picture is wrong. And it is wrong in a way that hides the real villain of this story. So, let us take it apart carefully. The plane of the solar system pulls on nothing. There is no surface there. No membrane. No material of any kind. Nothing to press against a passing ship. The plane is a pattern. A place where things happen to be. The way a flock of birds crossing the sky is a pattern. If you flew a glider through the middle of a flock, the flock would not pull you back after you left it. The ecliptic is exactly that kind of thing. It is where the planets are. And where they are has no power over where you must be. The sun is the only boss out there. And here is the one rule the sun enforces. It pulls you toward the sun. That is the entire rulebook. It does not pull you toward the plane, toward the floor, toward the neighborhood where the planets ride. It pulls you toward itself, dead center, from wherever you happen to stand. Hover directly above the sun's north pole, and it pulls you straight down at the pole. Float below the solar system's southern side, and it pulls you up toward the middle. Stand on the floor with the planets, and it pulls you flat across the floor. The sun is a lamp hanging in the center of a dark ballroom, and its gravity shines the way its light shines. Evenly, in every direction, with no favorite angle and no memory of where the furniture is. A ship above the plane feels no extra hand on its shoulder, no tug toward the crowd below. As far as the sun is concerned, up, down, and sideways are the same word. And we know this with complete confidence, because nature runs the experiment for us, constantly, right in front of our telescopes. Comets, the long-haul comets, the ones that visit once in thousands of years, come screaming into the inner solar system from every direction there is. Some drop in from high above the plane. Some climb in from far below it. Some cross at wild diagonal angles that respect no floor and no map. Astronomers have tracked them, arriving from all over the sphere of the sky. And every one of them, whatever direction it came from, gets treated by the sun in exactly the same way. Its path bends into the same beautiful curves, obeying the same law, hugging the same center. No comet has ever been pressed down into the plane of the planets as punishment for arriving from above. The sun never even notices. The floor, to the sun, does not exist. So now we have a genuine mystery on our hand, and it is worth feeling the full strangeness of it. Nothing pulled Ascent back down to the plane. No force held it in the flat neighborhood. The door out of the disk stands wide open, and it has stood wide open for 4.5 billion years. And yet our ship, with the mightiest engine we could imagine, climbed, curved, and came back through the floor anyway. Lap after lap, like something on a leash. If the solar system is not holding it, what is? Turn the question around and look at the ship itself. Because the answer has been riding aboard since the first page of this story. The thing bending ascent's path back through the plane, tonight and forever, is ascent's own speed. That 30 kilometers per second of inherited sideways motion is still in the ship. Still steering. Still whispering its one instruction into every trajectory. Keep circling. The sun supplies the pull. Yes, but the pull alone dooms nothing. It is the combination, the sun's grip plus the ship's enormous flat racing speed, that locks the path into a loop around the star. The ship is not being held in its orbit the way a prisoner is held by walls. It is being held the way a sprinter is held by his own momentum, unable to step sideways off the track mid-stride, because his legs are already committed, already spending their force in the old direction. I want to give you this picture and then let you sit with it, because it may be the strangest idea of the whole night. Our ship is in a prison with no walls. The guards went home before the Earth was born. The gate is open in every direction, including straight up, and the ship cannot walk out, because the ship cannot stop running. Every second, it covers 30 kilometers of ground in the old direction, the flat direction, the direction the Earth aimed it on the day it was carried into the sky. The sentence it is serving was handed down at launch, and the jailer is bolted inside its own hull. Understand that, and you finally understand what this mission has actually been about since the beginning. We are not fighting the sun. We never were. The sun would let any traveler out through the ceiling tonight without lifting a finger to stop it. We are fighting our own motion, and that fight has a price tag, an exact one, in cold, hard numbers. It is time to look at it. Bring the bill. Every mission in the history of spaceflight has been priced in the same currency. And it is probably not the one you would guess. Not dollars. Not tons of fuel. Not years. Mission planners price everything in something called delta V, which sounds technical and means something a child can hold. Change in velocity. How much you need to alter your motion. In kilometers per second. To get from the path you are on to the path you want. Every burn of every engine buys some. Every maneuver costs some. A mission is a shopping list of velocity changes. And the rocket is the wallet. So the question of tonight finally becomes a question with an exact answer. To take a ship that is circling the sun the flat way, in the plane with the planets, and turn it into a ship circling the sun the tall way, straight over the poles. What is the delta V? What does the turn cost? Set the problem up cleanly. Our ship glides along the floor at 30 kilometers per second. Sideways, we want it moving at that same 30 kilometers per second. But climbing, perpendicular to the floor, headed over the top of the sun. Same speed. New direction. Rotate the arrow 90 degrees. That is all. It is the smallest sounding request in this entire story. Here is how to feel the true size of it without a blackboard. Picture the ship's motion as an arrow, laid flat, 30 units long. Now picture the motion we want. A second arrow, 30 units long, standing straight up. Both arrows grow from the same point, like two hands of a clock, one pointing at 3, one pointing at noon. The engine's job is to get us from the first arrow to the second. And an engine only ever does one thing. It adds motion. Whatever burn we make gets stacked on top of the motion we already have. So ask, what single push, added to the flat arrow, turns it into the tall arrow? Stretch a string from the tip of the flat arrow to the tip of the tall one. That string is the burn we must perform. Its length is the delta V we must pay. And you can see with your eyes what geometry then confirms. The string is longer than either arrow. Run the numbers for 2 arrows of 30 at a right angle, and the string comes out at just over 42 kilometers per second. 42. Let that settle, because it is the sticker shock I promised you, and it deserves a slow minute. We wanted to change direction. We did not ask to go faster. We did not ask to go farther. And the price of merely pivoting our existing motion is 42 kilometers per second. More velocity change than the ship's entire speed. The turn costs more than the journey. If that sounds impossible, walk through what the burn actually has to accomplish. Because the engine is secretly doing 2 full jobs at once. Job 1, it must kill the old motion. All 30 kilometers per second of flat racing inheritance, grinding it down to 0. Job 2, it must build the new motion. 30 fresh kilometers per second of pure climb. From nothing, 30 to destroy, 30 to create. Doing both with a single diagonal burn buys a small discount off 60. And the discount lands you at 42. And I want to be precise about what that number is, because precision here is going to pay off later tonight. 42 is the price of making this turn in one move. Right here, at Earth's distance from the Sun, at Earth's full orbital speed. At this speed, in this place, there is no cheaper, honest version. Remember those 2 conditions. At this speed, in this place, they sound like fine print right now. Before this night is over, they are going to crack this entire problem wide open. To feel how obscene 42 is, put it next to the greatest wallet ever built. The Saturn V, the moon rocket, 36 stories of machine, 3,000 tons on the pad, the most powerful vehicle ever flown by our species. Add up every burn of every stage of a Saturn V as it carries its little payload from Florida all the way onto a path for the moon. And the entire mission, top to bottom, spends less than half of 42 kilometers per second. Half. The full might of the Apollo program, the summit of 20th century engineering, twice over, is roughly the cost of asking one spacecraft to turn left. Now, for the deeper wound. The reason this problem refuses to soften with time and technology. And it starts with a piece of intuition we all carry from daily life. Down here, speed and freedom feel like the same thing. The faster your car, the more places you can reach. The faster the jet, the smaller the world gets. More speed, more options. Every machine we have ever loved taught us that lesson. And in orbit, that lesson turns around and bites. Look again at the 2 arrows and the string. What set the price at 42? The length of the arrows. The ship's own speed. Make the arrows longer, and the string connecting their tips stretches with them. Automatically. Mercilessly. A ship doing 60 sideways would pay 85 to turn. A ship doing 100 would pay over 140. The cost of rotating your path scales directly with how fast you are already moving. Speed is the price. In deep space, velocity stops being your freedom and becomes your mortgage. And every extra kilometer per second you carry is another payment. The universe will demand the day you try to change your mind. You already know this feeling in your body. By the way, walking down a sidewalk, you can turn 90 degrees mid-stride into a shop doorway, and it costs you nothing. On a bicycle at full effort, that same right-angle turn becomes a project. A wide arc, brakes, leaned weight, burned momentum, in a car at highway speed. Taking a corner like a sidewalk pedestrian is called an accident. Same turn, same 90 degrees. Wildly different price. And the only thing that changed was how fast you were going when you asked. Our ship is asking at 30 kilometers per second. That is about 30 times the speed of a rifle bullet. Picture a bullet in flight, deciding it would rather travel straight up. And you have the physics of tonight in one image. So here is where the mission stands. Priced at last. One turn, 42 kilometers per second. A bill roughly triple what the best rockets ever built can deliver. For a single maneuver. Before the actual voyage even begins. Any sane engineer looking at that invoice reaches for the obvious fix. The American fix. If the wallet is too small, get a bigger wallet. Stack on more fuel. Build a larger tank. A taller stack. A monster. That instinct feels unbeatable. It built the Saturn V. And in the next chapter, we are going to follow it into the design room. Feed our ship all the fuel it could ever ask for. And watch, step by step, as the fuel itself turns against us. Because there is a trap buried in the arithmetic of rockets. A spiral hiding inside the tanks. And it is the reason no version of this mission was ever bought with muscle. The bill was never the worst part. The worst part is what happens when you try to pay it. Come into the design room with me. It is late. The coffee is old. And on the table sits the problem of the decade. Ascent needs 42 kilometers per second for its turn. And the biggest rocket in the building delivers 15 on its best day. The gap is enormous. But this room has closed enormous gaps before. The whiteboard is clean. Somebody uncaps a marker and writes the obvious first move at the top. Add more fuel. It sounds unbeatable. So let us actually do it. Honestly, step by step. And watch what happens. We bolt a new tank onto Ascent. A big one. Brimming with propellant. And before we celebrate, we weigh the ship. Because the number on the scale is where this story turns. Our ship is now heavier than it was a minute ago. Considerably heavier. Fuel is not weightless magic waiting to become speed. Fuel is mass. Tons and tons of dense liquid. And every ton of it now sits aboard our ship, demanding to be accelerated along with everything else. The engine no longer pushes just a spacecraft. It pushes a spacecraft plus a swimming pool. Feel the shape of the trap closing. That new fuel we added, the fuel meant to buy our turn, must itself be hauled up to speed before it burns. Hauling it takes fuel, so we add a second tank to push the first tank. But the second tank has mass too, and now it also needs pushing, which calls for a third tank, and the third calls for a fourth. And it is worse than tanks. Because tanks need structure. Bigger loads need thicker walls. Heavier plumbing. Stronger frames. Larger engines to lift the larger everything. And each of those additions lands on the scale as well, quietly demanding its own share of propellant to move it. Around and around the design room, the logic runs. And with every lap, one sentence keeps coming true. The ship gets heavier before it gets faster. We came in to feed the rocket. And the rocket is eating itself. Engineers have known the exact mathematics of this spiral since before the first rocket ever flew. And you do not need the equation tonight. Only its personality. Here is its personality. The cost of speed does not add. It multiplies. The first few kilometers per second of delta V are almost reasonable. A fair trade of fuel for motion. But each next slice of speed costs more than the slice before it. Because it must accelerate all the fuel reserved for the slices still to come. The price curve does not climb like a hill. It climbs like a wall, bending upward. steeper and steeper, until somewhere past the capability of your engines, the curve goes nearly vertical and the design room goes quiet. Let me put honest scale on that wall. To buy 15 kilometers per second, the total of our finest deep space missions, a rocket already has to be almost entirely propellant. A flying fuel tank with a whisper of cargo riding on top. Ask for a little more. 18, 20, and the cargo shrinks toward nothing while the vehicle swells toward absurdity. Now ask for 42, all of it from chemical engines, in one direct assault. Run the multiplication all the way out, and the answer stops being an engineering estimate and becomes a joke told in arithmetic. The rocket that turns left with brute force is not a bigger Saturn V. It is a vehicle massing more than a fleet of Saturn Vs, nearly all of it fuel, whose only job is to carry other fuel. A pyramid of propellant, wider than any launch pad, crushing under its own logic before it ever leaves the ground. For chemical rockets and any spacecraft heavy enough to be worth flying, this road is a dead end. You can imagine exotic ways around it. Refueling stations in deep space. Engines that do not exist yet. And engineers imagine them too. On better nights. But with the machines our species actually builds. No budget fixes this. No Congress. No billionaire. No national emergency. The spiral does not bend to money. And that, finally, is the real answer to the question this whole video asked at the start. Why has nobody ever flown straight up out of the solar system? Because everybody priced it. Every agency, every generation, every bright-eyed team with a whiteboard. They all met the same 42, chased it into the same spiral, and watched the same wall bend away above them. The empty room over our heads stayed empty for 70 years because the direct road up is guarded by the one opponent engineering cannot outmuscle. Compound arithmetic. So the frontal assault dies here, in the design room, under the fluorescent lights. But do not pack up the mission yet, because this is exactly the moment the story turns. Somewhere in that same room, late on some real night decades ago, somebody stopped staring at the engine specs and asked a different kind of question. Quieter, sneakier. What if we stop trying to overpower the bill and start looking for a way around it? What if the price of this turn is not the same everywhere in the solar system? What if, somewhere out there in the dark, the exact same maneuver goes on sale? That question has an answer. It is one of the most elegant answers in all of physics. And finding it is the whole second act of tonight. By the way, if this journey has been worth your while so far, a quick like or a subscribe genuinely helps this channel keep making nights like this one. And this is a good moment for it. Because everything from here on is the good part. The part where the engineers start to cheat. The way out of the trap was hiding inside the trap the whole time. Go back to the two conditions I asked you to remember in Chapter 6. The fine print under the 42-kilometer bill. At this speed, in this place, that bill was priced for a ship turning at Earth's full orbital pace, in Earth's neighborhood. And the rule that set the price was simple. The cost of turning your path scales with how fast you are moving. That is why our bill came to 42. Because we tried to pivot 30 kilometers per second of motion. And 30 is a brutal number to pivot. Fine. Now read the same rule again. Slowly, like a lawyer looking for a loophole. And notice what it says on the flip side. If turning is expensive when you are fast, then turning is cheap when you are slow. The rule was never just a wall. The rule was a coupon. The price of the turn depends entirely on where you make it. Which means the smart question was never, how do we afford the turn? The smart question is, Where is the turn affordable? So, is a spacecraft's speed around the sun something that changes from place to place? And you have felt the reason in your own arm since childhood. Throw a ball straight up. It leaves your hand fast, and gravity immediately starts collecting its tax. So the ball slows as it climbs, slows further, hangs for one weightless instant at the very top, and then trades all that height back for speed on the way down, arriving fast again. Orbits work the same way, because an orbit is just a throw that never lands. A spacecraft on a stretched-out, oval path around the sun is a thrown ball on the grandest scale. Close to the sun, it whips around at ferocious speed. Like the ball just off your hand, far from the sun it climbs and slows, and near the very top of its long arc, it drifts along at a small fraction of its old pace, like the ball hanging at the peak of the toss. Same ship, same orbit, same fuel aboard. Near the sun, it is a bullet. Out at the far end, it is a feather. Now put the two ideas together and watch decades of impossibility fall over. The turn is cheap where the ship is slow. The ship is slow far from the sun. So do not turn here. Here, in Earth's neighborhood, where the inheritance runs at full 30. The turn costs 42 and the mission dies in the design room. Instead, spend your rocket on something rockets are actually good at. Going fast in a straight line along the floor. Stretch your orbit outward, way outward, and coast up the long hill, away from the sun. Out there, more than 5 times Earth's distance from the sun. Our 30 kilometers per second of furious sideways motion has been taxed by the climb down to a crawl. A few kilometers per second and falling, and a few kilometers per second is a number you can turn. Out there, the 90-degree pivot that cost 42 in Earth's neighborhood drops to the price of an ordinary maneuver. The exact same turn, marked down by the geography of gravity itself. The bill was never fixed. The bill was local. And nobody said we had to pay it in the most expensive store in the solar system. I want you to sit with how backwards the winning strategy sounds, because this is the sentence that would get you laughed out of most rooms. To fly up. First, fly outward. Your target is the empty space above the sun. So you begin by racing along the floor, directly away from the sun, for hundreds of millions of kilometers, gaining not 1 meter of altitude above the plane, looking for all the world like a mission that has completely lost its mind. Every kilometer of that flat, the wrong way run is buying you something invisible. It is buying you slowness. It is carrying the debt of your inheritance out to the one place in the solar system where the debt shrinks small enough to kill. And now, because the pieces are finally on the table, let me show you the comparison that turns this from a clever trick into one of the strangest truths in spaceflight. Ask what it costs to leave the solar system entirely. Escape forever. Starting from Earth's orbit, a ship needs roughly an extra 12 kilometers per second, piled on top of its inheritance in the same flat direction, and the sun can never call it back. 12. Interstellar space. Permanent goodbye. 12 kilometers per second. Now put that next to our turn, priced under the same conditions. Same starting orbit. Same neighborhood. Rotating your path 90 degrees, while staying in the solar system. Costs 42. Read those two prices side by side, because they should not be possible together. Leaving forever costs 12. Turning left costs 42. It is 3.5 times more expensive to go up than to simply go. Period. If the solar system posted its prices on a road sign, the sign would say, exit. 12. Left turn. 42. And every engineer who ever read that sign understood in one glance why humanity became a civilization of sideways travelers. We did not stay on the floor because we lacked ambition. We stayed on the floor because upward is Kilometer for Kilometer, the single most expensive direction in the sky. That is the true meaning of the title of this video. And we had to earn every piece of it to get here. But we are not ending on a price tag. Because the discount strategy is real. And it works. And history has used it. Fly outward. Turn where you are slow. It only leaves one question. The practical one. Out there at the far, slow end of the road. A ship still needs something to make the turn with. Even a discounted pivot takes a push. And our ship has spent its rockets stretching the orbit. So what is out there? More than 5 times farther from the sun than Earth. Waiting in the dark exactly where the mission needs a push. Something is out there. Something enormous. The largest planet in the solar system is out there. 300 times the mass of the Earth. Swinging along its own groove in the floor. Hauling more momentum than every machine mankind will ever build combined. For every mission before this story, Jupiter was a destination. A place to visit and photograph and study. For the mission we are about to meet, Jupiter is something else entirely. Jupiter is a tool. The biggest steering wheel in the solar system, parked exactly at the bottom of the hill. And in 1990, after 16 years of heartbreak, a small spacecraft finally left Earth with instructions to go grab it. That spacecraft is the one from the opening of tonight. It is time you knew its name. To meet this spacecraft properly, we have to start with the embarrassing gap it was built to close. And the gap really was embarrassing. By the middle of the 1970s, humanity was having a spectacular decade in space. We had walked on the moon. We had landed machines on Mars and Venus. We were preparing the twin voyages for the grandest tour of the planets ever attempted. We could point at nearly anything in the sky and say, "We have seen it," or "We are on our way." And yet the scientists who studied our own star were sitting on a secret that almost nobody outside their field understood. Nobody had ever seen the top of the sun. Think about how strange that is. The sun is the most important object in every human life that has ever been lived. It is 93 million miles away, which in cosmic terms is our own front yard. And every photograph of it, every measurement, every observation from every telescope and every spacecraft in history had been taken from more or less the same angle. Side on, from down in the plane, staring at the sun's waistline. The reason is everything this video has taught you so far. Earth rides the floor of the solar system. So every observatory we have ever built rides the floor too. And from the floor, you see the sun, the way you see a merry-go-round from the parking lot. Edge on. Always. The poles of our own star. The 2 whole regions where its magnetic machinery does some of its most important work were blank spots on the map of human knowledge. We had better charts of the far side of the moon than we had of the top of the thing that keeps us all alive. So, in the mid-1970s, solar scientists in Europe and America drew up the obvious mission, and in its first form it was beautiful. 2 spacecraft. Twins. NASA would build one. The European Space Agency would build the other. Both would fly to Jupiter and use its gravity to throw themselves out of the plane. One arcing over the top of the sun, while the other swung beneath it. So that for the first time in history, our species would see its star from above and below at the same moment. Approvals came through in the late 70s. A launch was penciled in for February of 1983. On paper, the age of 3-dimensional solar science was less than a decade away. Then the money ran out. In 1981, NASA, squeezed by budget cuts across its planetary program, cancelled its half of the mission. One twin died on the drawing board. The Europeans, after all their years of work, faced a choice between walking away and flying alone. And they chose to fly alone. One spacecraft now instead of two, carrying instruments from both sides of the Atlantic, aiming for a launch aboard the space shuttle in May of 1986. You already know what happened in January of 1986. Challenger broke apart 73 seconds after liftoff. 7 astronauts died, and the entire shuttle fleet stood down for years while America grieved and rebuilt. Every payload with a shuttle ticket was grounded with it. And this mission had a shuttle ticket. The spacecraft was finished, tested, ready to fly. Instead, it was taken apart, packed into containers, and shipped back across the ocean to Europe, where it sat in storage. A completed interplanetary spacecraft waiting in a clean room like a boat in dry dock. While the seasons turned and the launch windows came and went, and the scientists who had proposed it in their 30s moved through their 40s toward their 50s. 4 more years. Then, at last, on October 6th of 1990, the Space Shuttle Discovery rose off the pad in Florida with the old Survivor riding in its cargo bay. Hours later, above the Earth, the bay doors opened and the spacecraft was released. A small, boxy machine with a single dish antenna, barely the size of a garden shed. All that remained of the Grand Twin Fleet from the 70s, the Europeans had given it a new name by then. And the name was almost too perfect. They called it Ulysses, after the hero of the oldest voyage story our civilization owns. The sailor who reached his destination only after years of detours that would have broken anyone else. The scientists who named it were thinking of his long way home. They could just as well have been describing the paperwork. Add the whole ordeal up. First sketched in the mid-70s. Half cancelled in 81. Grounded by tragedy in 86. Boxed. Shipped. Stored. Reassembled. And finally flying as the 90s began. It took Ulysses 16 months to fly to Jupiter. It took 16 years to get off the ground. And the entire time, through every cancellation and every delay, the mission it carried never changed by a single word. Fly to Jupiter. Let Jupiter throw you over the sun. Look at what no one has ever seen. The turn we priced at 42 kilometers per second in Chapter 6. The turn that eats fleets of Saturn V's. The turn our imaginary ship Ascent could never afford with the biggest tank in the universe, was now bolted into the flight plan of a real machine, built by real people who had waited most of their careers for it. And the first thing that machine had to do, once it was finally free and flying, was the thing this whole night has been pointing at. It had to turn its back on the sun it was built to study, and run. Picture the scene above the Earth on that October afternoon in 1990. Because as spaceflight moments go, this one is quietly one of the strangest ever staged. The shuttle Discovery coasts in orbit. Doors open. Ulysses floats free of the bay. And take one good look at it while it hangs there. Because its size is part of the story. This is a small machine, about 800 pounds, lighter than a big touring motorcycle. A box of instruments wearing a single dish antenna, dwarfed by the 100-ton shuttle that delivered it. And then, stage by stage, an enormous stack of solid rocket motors attached to that little box begins to fire. This was the price of the shuttle era. The shuttle could only carry Ulysses to low Earth orbit, a couple hundred miles up, still deep in Earth's gravity, still doing the same old flat racing speed as everything else. To reach Jupiter on schedule, the probe needed a violent shove. So, the engineers had bolted it to the biggest stack of boosters ever flown out of a shuttle bay. A booster assembly, many times the mass of the spacecraft itself. When it lit, Ulysses went from drifting cargo to cannonball. By the time the last stage burned out and fell away, the spacecraft was leaving Earth faster than any machine our species had ever launched anywhere. More than 15 kilometers per second away from Earth. Faster than either Voyager had left. Faster than the Pioneers. On the day it flew, little half cancelled. Twice delayed. 800-pound Ulysses was the fastest object human beings had ever thrown. Period. Now Saver, who was setting that record, the all-time speed champion of spaceflight. In that moment, was a sun probe, and it earned the title running away from the sun. It aimed itself at the outer solar system, at the cold and the dark, at a destination more than 5 times farther from the sun than Earth, where sunlight arrives more than 25 times weaker than the light outside your window. That is why Ulysses carried no solar panels at all. A machine built entirely to study the sun, flying a course so deep into the dim that sunlight out there was useless to it. So, it ran instead on a small nuclear generator. Plutonium warming metal, the same quiet technology that has kept the Voyagers alive in the dark for half a century. The mission's own hardware was a confession. To see the sun properly, we had to build a sun probe dressed for a journey to the middle of nowhere. And the middle of nowhere took a while. For 16 months. From October of 1990 to February of 1992, Ulysses did the least heroic-looking thing in this entire story. It cruised, flat, sideways, right down the floor of the solar system. In the plane, with all the ordinary traffic. Exactly like every mission before it. Week after week, the sun shrank behind it, and the radio delay stretched longer. And anyone watching its track on a map, knowing its mission was the poles of the sun, would have sworn something had gone wrong. The probe, assigned to fly higher than any machine in history, spent its first year and a half gaining an altitude of 0. But you know better now, because you spent the whole first half of tonight earning this exact moment. Look at that flat run again with Chapter 8 in your head. Ulysses was not wasting time on the floor. It was using the floor. Every one of those months of sideways coasting was carrying its inherited speed up the long hill away from the sun, letting gravity tax the inheritance mile by mile, hauling the debt out to the one neighborhood in the solar system where the debt becomes killable. The flat plane, the prison of this whole story, was being used as a runway. Nearly 1 billion kilometers of runway, pointed the wrong way on purpose. All of it aimed at a rendezvous window the planners had timed down to a stretch of days, years in advance. The mission had exactly one shot at its geometry. Jupiter would be passing a particular point on its own groove in February of 1992, and Ulysses had to arrive at that point. At that time, at that speed, or there was no mission at all. It arrived. On February 8th of 1992, Ulysses swept into the neighborhood of the largest planet in the solar system, passing within about 400,000 kilometers of the cloud tops, closer to Jupiter than our own moon is to us. It was only the 5th machine in history to reach the giant planet. The 4 before it, the Pioneers and the Voyagers, had all come for the same reason. To look. They photographed the storms. They measured the radiation. They marveled, and they slingshotted onward to farther worlds. Always along the floor. Always chasing the next destination. Ulysses spent 17 days crossing the Jovian system, and its cameras were nowhere on the priority list, because it had not come to look. It had come to use the place. Ahead of it, swinging along its groove at 13 kilometers per second, was 300 times the mass of the Earth. A gravitational machine large enough to grab a passing spacecraft and hurl it in directions no rocket could ever afford. Every mission before had treated Jupiter as a destination. Ulysses was about to treat it as a steering wheel. What happened over those 17 days in February is the hinge of this entire story. The moment the impossible turn finally gets made. And it deserves a chapter with nothing else in it. To understand what Jupiter did to Ulysses in February of 1992, start with something you have felt in your own body. Picture a kid on rollerblades at the edge of a playground, and picture a big carousel spinning in the middle of it. One of those old, heavy steel ones, loaded with riders, turning with real momentum. The kid skates toward it, reaches out, and grabs the bar for just a second as it sweeps past. You know what happens next? The carousel does not stop. The carousel barely notices. It whips the kid through a curve and flings him off in a completely new direction, moving with speed he did not have before. Speed his own legs never produced. For 1 second, the spinning mass of the whole carousel was his engine. And if you asked whether the carousel paid a price for that, the answer is yes. Technically, it slowed by an amount so small that no rider aboard could ever measure it. The kid stole momentum from a machine 10,000 times his size. And the machine shrugged. That is a gravity assist. That is the whole trick. The most elegant maneuver in spaceflight. And the bar the spacecraft grabs is gravity itself. Here is the version with a planet. Jupiter is not sitting still out there. Jupiter is a rider on the same great floor as everything else, sweeping along its groove around the Sun at 13 kilometers per second. And it masses 300 times the Earth. That is the carousel, loaded and turning. Now send a small spacecraft skating close past it. As the ship falls into Jupiter's gravity, it speeds up, whips around the planet through a tight curve, and climbs back out. Seen from Jupiter itself, the encounter is perfectly fair. The ship leaves with exactly the speed it arrived with, just pointed a new way. But seen from the Sun, from the frame where the mission actually lives, something enormous has changed hands. The ship grabbed a moving planet as it swept past, and the planet's own orbital momentum got mixed into the ship's path. Direction. Rotated. Speed. Altered. All of it paid for by Jupiter, which slowed in its ancient orbit by an amount too small for any instrument ever built to detect. A cup of water taken from the ocean. The ocean does not keep records like that. Now for the part that matters most tonight. The reason this maneuver solves the unsolvable. When a rocket engine turns a spacecraft, the price is fuel. And Chapter 7 showed you that the fuel bill for a big turn spirals into fantasy. When a planet turns a spacecraft, the price is momentum, and the planet pays it. The size of the turn is set by the mass of the planet and the geometry of the pass. How close? At what angle? From which side? Get the geometry right, and there is almost no limit to how hard a giant planet can bend your path, including the one direction no engine in the world could afford. Straight out of the plane, the 42 kilometer per second turn, the fleet of Saturn V's, the wall of compound arithmetic from the design room. All of it can be paid in full by simply flying past Jupiter at exactly the right spot. The bill does not shrink. The bill gets handed to somebody who will never miss the money. So, look at the geometry the Ulysses planners drew. Because it is a beautiful piece of three-dimensional thinking. They did not aim their spacecraft to pass beside Jupiter, the way every floor-bound mission before it had. They aimed it high, so that Ulysses would sweep over the top of the giant. over its northern face. Trace what gravity does with that arrangement. As Ulysses crosses above the planet, Jupiter pulls it down and around, bending the flight path over the top and hurling it out the far side, angled sharply downward, below the floor of the solar system, toward the deep south. The pass works like a ski jump built in reverse. A ramp that catches a flat racing object and slings it plunging out of the plane. The planners had found their corner. The one corner in the entire solar system, sharp enough and strong enough to make the turn. And they steered their one irreplaceable spacecraft straight into it at full speed. February 8th, 1992. Ulysses comes in on the line it has held for 16 months, crosses into Jupiter's grip, and for 17 days, the encounter unfolds in slow, silent, colossal grace. No burn, no countdown, no white-knuckle engine firing with the mission on the line. The main event of this entire program, the maneuver 16 years of setbacks had all been pointed at, was a fall. The spacecraft simply fell along the invisible curve the planners had drawn years earlier, and Jupiter's gravity did every bit of the work, wrenching the flight path around, tipping it out of the plane of the planets degree by degree by degree. Out at the edge of the encounter, the numbers told the story. Ulysses had arrived flat, a floor rider, like every machine before it. It left on a path tilted roughly 80 degrees to the sun's equator. That is no ramp, and no lean. 80 degrees, nearly perpendicular, a trajectory standing almost straight up out of the ancient disk, aimed down and around toward the unexplored south of our star. Stop and weigh what just got purchased, and what it cost. The most expensive single turn in the history of spaceflight. The turn that grounded a dream for the better part of a century. Was executed in a couple of weeks of coasting. For a fuel cost of approximately nothing. Ulysses burned less propellant in that whole encounter than a launch pad wastes in a morning. The engineers never found a way to beat the physics. There is no beating the physics. The bill was real. The bill was astronomical. And the bill got paid. It just got paid by a planet. Out of a bank account 4.5 billion years deep. In a currency called momentum that Jupiter has never once counted. And with the corner behind it, the little spacecraft that had spent its whole existence being cancelled, delayed, boxed up, and aimed the wrong way, was finally, truly, on its way to the top of the sky. Below it, the entire flat world of the solar system began to tilt away. Ahead of it lay a region of space no machine of ours had ever entered on purpose. The high country, and it is time we went up there with it. The climb took 2 years. And think about how alone the spacecraft was on it. Nearly every machine humanity had ever flown was somewhere on the floor below. Back in the plane, crawling the flat familiar roads between the planets. Ulysses arced down and out of the disk into the empty southern sky. A region with no worlds in it. No destination. No traffic. Nothing at all except the one thing it had come for. The view, through 1993, the sun's own magnetic field, measured day after day aboard the ship, quietly confirmed what the flight path promised. The readings had gone steady and unmistakable. Ulysses was no longer in the sun's equatorial weather at all. It had entered the domain of the southern pole, territory belonging to a part of our star that no instrument in history had ever sampled directly. While it climbed, the people came back into the story, because a spacecraft alone in the dark is only half a mission. The other half lived in office buildings in Pasadena, California, where a joint European and American team ran Ulysses out of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And in the giant dish antennas of the Deep Space Network, spread across 3 continents, 8 hours out of every day. One of those dishes turned to a patch of empty southern sky and listened to a whisper from a place no antenna had ever pointed before. And think about who was doing the listening. Some of the scientists reading those data streams had proposed this mission as young researchers in the 1970s. 30-year-olds with an idea and a drawing. They were in their 50s now. They had spent entire careers on a single question. Watched it get half cancelled. Watched it get grounded by tragedy. Watched it sit in a warehouse. And here it finally was, alive on their screens. Numbers arriving every day from below the bottom of the sun. There are not many rooms in the history of science where 20 years of stubbornness paid off that literally 8 hours at a time. Then, in the summer of 1994, the mission crossed its finish line. And the finish line was a place. On June 26th, Ulysses climbed past 70 degrees of solar latitude. The altitude scientists had defined as the true polar region. And for the next 4.5 months, deep into November, it flew where nothing of ours had ever flown. Over the bottom of the sun, on September 13th, 1994, it reached the top of its arc. Just over 80 degrees south, about as directly beneath the sun's pole as its orbit would ever carry it. Picture the geometry of that moment, because no photograph of it exists and none was taken. A small, dark machine, hanging in the black below the solar system. And above it, the entire known universe of human activity. The sun overhead, the whole flat disk of the planets spread out beyond it like a ceiling. Earth up there somewhere on its groove, carrying every launch pad, every mission control, every person who had ever waited 16 years for anything. There were, if you want to be exact, 2 human machines below the floor of the solar system that season. One was Voyager 2, coasting down and away on the tilt Neptune had handed it at the exits, bound for interstellar space. The other was the only machine our species has ever aimed below the floor on purpose. And it was exactly where 2 decades of planning said it would be, working perfectly. And the discoveries came immediately, because the sun's polar territory turned out to be genuinely foreign country. The first surprise was the wind. You may remember from this channel's Voyager story that the sun breathes, pouring out a constant hurricane of particles called the solar wind, the same wind that inflates the great bubble around the solar system. From the floor, from Earth's neighborhood, we had always known that wind as a gusty, moderate thing, blowing past us at around 350 kilometers per second. Ulysses climbed into the southern high latitudes and found a different wind entirely. Smooth, relentless, and fast. 750 kilometers per second. Better than twice the speed of the equatorial breeze. A hard, steady gale roaring off the sun's polar regions without gusts and without pause. Our star, it turns out, has 2 winds. A slow, turbulent one that it breathes across its waste, where all the planets happen to live, and a fast, clean one that it pours from its poles, filling most of the volume of the sun's bubble. 2/3 of the heliosphere is dominated by a wind that, until one spacecraft made one turn at Jupiter, no human instrument had ever touched. The second surprise was the map itself. Every textbook drawing of the sun's magnetic field looked like the field around a bar magnet. Lines spreading wide at the equator and bunching up dense and strong over the poles. That is what the polar passes were partly designed to check. And the real sun failed the check. Ulysses measured the field's outward strength as it climbed from the equator toward the pole and found it did not pile up over the poles at all. It held roughly even, latitude after latitude. The sun's magnetism spreading itself far more democratically than the diagrams had promised, which quietly meant that a related prediction collapsed too. Scientists had expected the polar regions to be a kind of open doorway where cosmic rays from the galaxy could pour into the solar system more easily. Ulysses flew up to the doorway and found it shut. The high country over the sun obeyed rules nobody had written down yet. And that, in science, is the definition of a successful trip. Ulysses never got to rest on any of it. Its orbit swept it on, down from the southern heights, plunging back through the plane of the planets, and up the other side. And in the summer of 1995, it did it all again over the top of the sun, crossing the northern polar region from June to the end of September. South Pole, then North Pole, within a single year and a half. The mission, originally chartered to do exactly that, once, was now complete. The spacecraft kept flying anyway. Its great tilted loop around the sun takes a bit over 6 years per lap, and the little machine turned out to be nearly indestructible. So it simply kept lapping, and the agencies kept listening. It rode over both poles again, around the turn of the millennium, and again in the 2006s and 7s. 6 polar passes in all, watching the sun in its quiet years and its violent years, even flying through the tail of a passing comet along the way, built for 5 years of life. It worked for nearly 19%, and when its power finally faded and the mission formally ended in June of 2009, Ulysses had done something subtle and enormous. It had turned the sun from a circle into a sphere, every model of our star's bubble, every map of the wind that fills it. Every modern mission that studies the sun in 3 dimensions is standing on data that one spacecraft went and got, from a place you can only reach by flying 1 billion kilometers the wrong way. 16 years to the launch pad, 16 months to Jupiter, 2 years of climbing, and at the end of all of it, a machine the size of a garden shed, hanging under the south pole of the sun, sending home the news from the top of the sky, 8 hours a day, to people who had grown grey waiting for it. As triumphs go, spaceflight has produced almost nothing, stranger. But there is a detail about that triumph I have not told you yet, and I have been saving it on purpose, because it is the honest asterisk on this entire victory, and it changes how you should picture everything you just heard. Ulysses flew over the poles of the sun. That is true and permanent. What it never did, what it could not do, what the physics of its own hard-won orbit forbade it from doing, was get close. And the reason why opens the last door of tonight. When people hear that a spacecraft flew over the poles of the sun, almost everyone forms the same picture. A little machine rises up, arrives at a spot high above the pole, and parks there, hanging in the dark like a drone over a stadium, looking down at the star turning below. It is a lovely picture, and it feels so natural because it is how we look at everything down here. You climb the tower, you stop at the observation deck, you take in the view for as long as you like. Altitude, in the world you and I live in, is a place you can stay. Above the sun, it is not. There is no observation deck up there, no balcony, and there never can be. Think about what parking over the pole would actually require. A spacecraft hanging motionless above the sun is a spacecraft with 0 orbital speed. And you already know from Chapter 5 what the sun does to things that hold still in its grip. It pulls them straight in. The only way to hover at a fixed point over the pole would be to fight that pull directly. Engines firing downward at the sun, continuously, forever, burning propellant every second of every day just to stand still. like a helicopter that can never, ever land. No machine we know how to build carries that kind of fuel for a week, let alone a mission. Standing still is the one luxury the sun sells to no one. So Ulysses did the only thing physics offers. It kept moving, around and around its great tilted loop, and it visited the high country the way a Ferris wheel visits the top of its arc, climbing, cresting, descending, passing through the polar sky rather than stopping in it. 4.5 months over the south, then down, across the plain, and up over the north, then out to the far cold end of its orbit near Jupiter's distance, and back again. One full circuit every 6.2 years. Forever. The polar view was never a possession. It was an appointment. And the spacecraft kept that appointment 3 times over each pole across 19 years. Always arriving. Always sweeping past. Never once allowed to linger. We reached the top of the sky by accepting that nothing is permitted to stay there. And then there is the other price. The one I flagged at the end of the last chapter. And it is time to look at it squarely. Ulysses saw the poles from very, very far away. Here are the honest numbers. When Ulysses crossed the polar regions in 1994 and 1995, it was about 2.2 astronomical units from the Sun, well over 300 million kilometers. More than twice as far from the Sun as the Earth ever is. Its closest approach to the Sun in its entire 19-year career came in March of 1995, at 200 million kilometers. And even that record still left it tens of millions of kilometers farther out than the planet you are lying on right now. Sit with that for a second. The most daring solar mission of its century, the machine that finally broke out of the plane, spent every day of its life farther from the Sun than Earth is. You have been closer to the Sun than Ulysses ever got. Your whole life, without leaving your bed. The reason is baked into the very trick that made the mission possible. The turn was purchased at Jupiter, so the orbit forever runs back out to Jupiter's neighborhood. A long ellipse anchored at the giant planet's distance, and even its closest sweep past the Sun stays wide. That was the deal. Jupiter would pay for the tilt, and in exchange, the orbit would belong partly to Jupiter forever. The mission planners knew it and accepted it gladly, because their instruments measured wind and magnetism and particles, things you can sample beautifully from far away, the way a weather buoy far offshore still reads the storm. It is also why Ulysses carried no camera at all, not one imaging instrument on the whole spacecraft. The first machine in history with a view of the top of the Sun, and it was blind. By design. Because from that distance, with that power budget, on that hard-won orbit, pictures were a luxury the mission could not carry, which leaves the obvious ache. Ulysses touched the polar wind, counted the polar particles, mapped the polar magnetism, and proved the high country was reachable. What it could not do was show us. No photograph of the Sun's poles came home in 1994, or 1995, or ever, from anywhere. For decades after, the 2 most mysterious regions of the most important object in the sky remained. Photographically, a blank space on the map of human knowledge. Into the 2020s. Reaching above the Sun had cost a trip to Jupiter. And the trip to Jupiter had cost us the close-up view. Unless somebody could find a different staircase. A way to tilt an orbit without leaving the Sun's front yard. A deal with a closer planet. On humbler terms. Paid in smaller bills. 30 years after Ulysses made its turn at the giant, a new spacecraft left Florida to try exactly that. And its story is happening right now. This year, With a payment due this Christmas Eve, in February of 2020, an Atlas rocket lifted off from Cape Canaveral carrying a spacecraft called Solar Orbiter, a joint project of the European Space Agency and NASA, and its mission statement read like a direct answer to everything Ulysses could not do. See the poles of the sun. Actually see them. With telescopes. In pictures. And do it from close range. Closer to the sun than Mercury at its nearest sweeps. Near enough to resolve the fine machinery of our star, instead of sampling its weather from across the room. Read those two requirements together, and you can feel the design problem. Close and tilted. Ulysses got tilted by going to Jupiter. But the Jupiter road drags your whole orbit out to Jupiter's distance, which is the opposite of close. And a spacecraft carrying telescopes wants to live near the sun for another reason too. Solar Orbiter runs on solar panels. And sunlight out at Jupiter is a whisper. More than 25 times weaker than at Earth. The big corner at the bottom of the hill was useless to this mission. If Solar Orbiter wanted altitude, it would have to find the tilt somewhere in the sun's own front yard, among the inner planets, where the traffic is fast and the turns are expensive. The answer was Venus. Venus is no Jupiter. It has less than 1/100th of Jupiter's mass, a modest little carousel, and a single pass can bend a spacecraft's path by only a few degrees. The Solar Orbiter planners looked at that small number and made the obvious move that nobody had ever committed to before. If one pass buys a few degrees, fly past Venus again, and again, and again. They locked the spacecraft into an orbital rhythm synchronized with Venus itself, so that every couple of laps around the Sun, Solar Orbiter and Venus arrive at the same corner at the same time, and the planet hands over another installment of tilt. There is no single dramatic turn anywhere in this flight plan, and no billion-kilometer detour either. Just the same corner, taken over and over, each pass prying the orbit a few degrees further out of the plane. The mission team in Europe has a name for the strategy. They call it the Stairway to Heaven. And for once, an engineering nickname undersells the thing. Watch the staircase climb in real dates. Through its first years, Flybis in 2020, 2021, and 2022 shaped the orbit and nudged its tilt to around 7 degrees, barely off the floor, about where the ordinary scatter of the planets lives. Then, in February of 2025, Venus delivered the payment that changed history. One pass, and the orbit jumped from roughly 7 degrees to 17. And with that jump, the mission's high-latitude era officially began. 17 degrees is no polar orbit, but it was more than double anything a sun-watching telescope had ever achieved. And it was enough. The following month, the March of 2025, Solar Orbiter aimed its instruments up from below the plane and photographed the south pole of the sun. The first images of a solar pole in the history of the human species. The blank space on the map. The one Ulysses could measure and never show us. Finally had a picture in it. And the picture was strange and beautiful. A churning landscape of tangled magnetism at the bottom of our star. Patches of north and south polarity scrambled together like a magnet mid-flip. Every solar physicist alive had waited their entire career for that image. Some had waited since the days when Ulysses was a drawing of 2 spacecraft that did not get to exist. And the staircase keeps climbing, which brings this story all the way to the present. To the year you are listening in. This December, on Christmas Eve of 2026, Solar Orbiter swings past Venus again, and the planet will hand over the next installment, deepening that high-latitude era, tilting the orbit from 17 degrees up to 24. More passes follow. And by 2029, the tilt reaches 33 degrees. High enough to look down on the polar regions more directly than any camera ever has. Somewhere over Venus this Christmas Eve, while the holiday lights are on across America, a planet is going to quietly pay a bill that no rocket on Earth could cover. It is worth remembering for 1 second between the wrapping paper and the carols. The stairway is still being climbed. Right now, in your lifetime, a few degrees per visit. Step back and look at the two missions side by side, because together they complete the answer to the question this video asked an hour ago. Ulysses and Solar Orbiter attacked the same wall with opposite philosophies, and it is worth being precise about what each one actually won. Ulysses took one colossal loan from the biggest lender in the solar system and bought the full turn, a true polar orbit, 80 degrees, sailing almost directly over the top and bottom of the star. And it paid for that angle with permanent distance and permanent blindness. Solar Orbiter is buying a different product. Its staircase tops out near 33 degrees. Nowhere near polar. A high shoulder rather than the summit. But it climbs that shoulder while staying close. Telescopes running. Eyes open. Inside Mercury's distance at its nearest sweeps. One mission bought the whole angle and gave up the view. The other keeps the view and buys what angle it can afford. And underneath both strategies, notice the law that never once bent. Neither spacecraft pays for its own tilt with engines and fuel. The 42-kilometer bill from Chapter 6 never got cheaper at Earth's speed and Earth's distance. It got transferred. Or it got shrunk by shopping in slower neighborhoods. And in both cases, a planet covered the payment. Out of momentum, older than life on Earth. Which brings up a question that has been quietly waiting behind this whole second act. And it deserves its own chapter before we go any further. 2 space agencies spent 5 decades. 2 spacecraft. And billions of dollars to climb above the plane of the solar system. 16 years of heartbreak for Ulysses. A staircase of Venus flybys still being climbed today. All of that effort. For altitude. And a fair question has every right to be asked here. Why? What is actually up there that is worth all this? The answer has less to do with curiosity than you might think. And much more to do with the lights staying on in your house. The answer to that question has a date. And the date is March 13th, 1989. Just after 2 in the morning that night, in the province of Quebec. The power grid collapsed. Not slowly, not in stages. In about 90 seconds, a network serving 6 million people fell over like a line of dominoes, and Montreal went dark in the middle of a winter night. The subway stopped. The airport went black. 6 million people spent up to 9 hours in the cold. And the engineers who scrambled to restart the grid found nothing wrong with it in any ordinary sense. No downed lines. No failed plant. The thing that broke Quebec that night had left the scene at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Because the thing that broke Quebec came from the sun. A few days earlier, our star had thrown a tantrum. The sun does this. Every so often, it hurls a piece of itself into space. 1 billion tons of magnetized gas erupting off its surface and ballooning outward like a cannonball the size of 30 Earths. Astronomers call these eruptions coronal mass ejections, and most of them sail off harmlessly in directions that do not matter to us. The one in March of 1989 happened to be aimed at this planet. When it arrived, it shook Earth's magnetic field so hard that the shaking drove rogue currents through the long power lines of Quebec. And the grid, sensing chaos it was never designed for, tripped itself into darkness. That is a real thing the sun can do to a modern country. And Quebec was a warning shot. Far from the worst case. The worst storm in recorded history hit back in 1859, in the age of the telegraph, and it was so violent that telegraph offices sparked. Operators were jolted at their keys, and lines carried current with the batteries disconnected. Run a storm like that at today's civilization, at the power grids and the satellite fleets and the global positioning system that quietly runs shipping and banking and your phone. And the damage estimates run into the trillions. This is why governments now employ people whose entire job is forecasting the weather on a star. And here is where those forecasters run into the exact problem this whole night has been about. They are trying to watch the sun's weather from the floor. Think about what our position actually gives us. Every solar telescope we have ever built rides the plane. So we stare at the sun from the side. Edge on, at its waistline. Now picture a storm that matters. One aimed straight at Earth. From our angle, that eruption comes directly at the camera. Head on. A ball growing larger in the frame. Judging the speed of an object flying straight at your face is one of the hardest measurements there is. You can see that it is coming. Nailing down exactly how fast, and exactly when it will arrive, and exactly how hard it will hit, is far messier. And those are the three numbers a power company begging for a warning actually needs. It is like standing on the tracks to study an oncoming train. The one place you happen to be standing is the single worst seat for the measurement. Now, put your telescope above the plane instead, high over the sun, and the whole problem turns friendly. From up there, you watch that same storm from the side, crossing the open space between the sun and the earth like a car crossing your field of view. And its speed and track read out almost at a glance. From up there, you can see the entire highway between our star and our planet at once. Every storm on it, every gust in the solar wind. The whole shooting gallery laid out below you like traffic seen from a news helicopter. Forecasters on the floor are guessing at a train schedule from the tracks. A forecaster overhead would simply read it. And altitude pays a second dividend, one that runs even deeper. The sun's storms are not random. They follow a rhythm, a cycle of quiet years and violent years, about 11 years long. And the engine of that cycle sits exactly where you would least like it to sit, at the poles. The magnetic fields over the sun's polar regions are the seed corn of the next cycle. Their strength in the quiet years shapes how fierce the coming storm years will be. Which means the single best early warning about the next decade of solar violence is written on the two parts of the sun that, from the floor, we can barely see at all. This is not a small gap. Predicting the solar cycle well is worth billions in satellite planning and grid protection alone. And for half a century, we have been trying to read the most important page of the forecast at an impossible angle. Like reading the label on the top of a jar from across the room, below the level of the shelf. So when Ulysses measured the polar magnetic fields directly and found them weaker than the textbooks predicted, that was not trivia. That was the first honest reading of the sun's seed corn. And when Solar Orbiter photographed the scrambled magnetism of the South Pole in 2025, mid-flip, patches of north and south tangled together, it was handing cycle forecasters the exact data their models have been starving for since the field began. Every degree of tilt, those missions brought converts into something unglamorous and priceless. A better forecast. A grid that trips gracefully instead of collapsing. A satellite fleet safed in time. A warning measured in days instead of hours. Which is the real answer to why. The climb above the solar system was never just a trophy for the mantle of science. The high ground above the sun is a weather station, aimed at the one kind of weather that can reach through 200 million kilometers of vacuum and turn off the lights in Montreal. We did not spend 50 years learning to fly up for the poetry of it. We did it. In the end, for the same reason people climb any watchtower. From the floor, you see the storm when it hits you. From above, you see it coming. But every watchtower we have ever climbed, we climbed on borrowed legs. And that is the last piece of unfinished business in the engineering of tonight. Jupiter carried Ulysses. Venus is carrying Solar Orbiter, step by step, on Venus's own schedule. Along routes Venus happens to allow. As long as planets are the only lenders, we climb when they say and where they say. So before the final act of tonight, one last question. Is there any machine, real or on a drawing board, that could pay its own way up? There are two, and both of them found a loophole in the exact rule that killed brute force back in Chapter 7. Think back to what actually killed the brute force plan. Back in the design room, it was never the engine. Chemical rocket engines are magnificent machines, and they had the muscle for the job. What killed the plan was the luggage. The fuel itself, tons upon tons of it. Every ton demanding more tons to push it. The spiral that ate the ship. The bill was payable in principle. It was the weight of the payment that broke the mission. Which means the rule that grounded us has a loophole hiding in plain sight. If the problem is carrying the payment, find a way to carry less of it, or none at all. Two technologies attack that loophole, and both of them are real. The first is the ion engine, and if you have never met one, prepare to be underwhelmed and then slowly amazed. A chemical rocket is a bonfire, a monster that empties its entire tank in minutes, shaking the ground for miles. An ion engine is a whisper. It still carries propellant, and that matters. So, let me say it plainly. There is a tank aboard, filled with a gas called xenon. But instead of burning its propellant in a violent fire, the engine electrifies it, using power from solar panels to fire individual atoms out the back at enormous velocity, sipping the tank one atom stream at a time. The thrust this produces is genuinely comical. A working ion engine pushes about as hard as a sheet of paper resting on your open palm. Hold a single sheet of printer paper and feel its weight. That is the engine. A machine like that could never lift itself off a table. And if you judged it the way we judge rockets, in seconds of fury, you would throw it away. But the ion engine does not run for seconds. It runs for years. Where the bonfire spends its whole tank in minutes and goes silent forever. The whisper keeps whispering, day after day, month after month, patiently adding speed, a hair at a time. And because it squeezes roughly 10 times more push out of every pound of propellant than a chemical engine can, the luggage problem collapses. The spiral that ate our ship in Chapter 7 starts with heavy fuel. And this fuel is light for what it buys. Give the paper's weight of thrust a few years of uninterrupted work, and the arithmetic turns astonishing. NASA has flown an ion-powered spacecraft, the Dawn mission to the asteroid belt, whose engines delivered a total change in velocity of more than 11 kilometers per second over its life, close to what entire giant launch vehicles deliver. Out of a machine you could park in a garage. The bonfire wins every sprint. The whisper wins the marathon. And the great turnout of the plane is the longest marathon in the solar system. The second technology goes further and removes the tank entirely. The solar sail. Sunlight. It turns out, pushes light itself, striking a surface, delivers a tiny physical shove, far too small for you to ever feel, but real, measured, and free. So build a mirror, enormous and impossibly thin, thinner than a human hair, wide as a city block, and unfurl it in space. The sun does the rest. A steady pressure of light leans on the sail every second of every day. And the propellant is being shipped in, for free, at the speed of light, from a star that will not stop burning for billions of years. Japan flew the first true solar sail between the planets in 2010. A spacecraft called Ikaros, riding light itself across the Gulf toward Venus, and proved the whole idea works outside a textbook. And sails belong in this particular story for one reason. Angle the mirror right, lap after lap around the sun, and that endless, gentle push can be spent on the purchase nothing else can afford. Tilt. NASA has studied sail missions designed to do exactly this, spiraling in close to the sun where the light is fiercest, then cranking the orbit upward, degree after degree, year after year, toward a path standing nearly straight over the poles of the sun, higher than Ulysses, higher than solar orbiter will ever climb, bought entirely with sunshine. Now, before this starts to sound like the cheat code that ends the game, let us be honest about what these machines actually change. Because the rules of tonight are still the rules. The law from Chapter 8 has not blinked. Turning is expensive where you are fast and cheap where you are slow. And a change of direction must still be paid for in full. Every degree of it. What the whisper and the mirror change is the manner of payment. And only the manner. They cannot erase the bill. What they can do is stretch it across time and carry it to the cheap neighborhoods. A slow, patient engine does not have to make one terrifying turn at Earth's full racing speed. It can reshape its orbit gradually, do its turning out where turning costs little, and spend years doing what a chemical rocket would have to do in one impossible afternoon. Look at the whole night in one glance, and you can finally see the complete menu. Every way up that physics has ever offered. Pay fast. In fuel. And the spiral eats you. Pay with a planet's momentum. And the planet sets the route and the schedule. Or pay slowly. In years of your mission's life, whispering and sailing your way up the hill. Fool. Favors. Or time. 3 currencies. 1 unforgiving ledger. And every mission to the high country. Past or future. Real or dreamed. Chooses its poison from that same short list. Neither the whisper nor the mirror has made the great climb yet. The sail missions live on drawing boards. And no ion craft has been sent up the hill. But the loophole is real. The physics is proven. And somewhere in the second half of this century, the odds are good that a machine will finally climb out of the plane, owing nothing to any planet, paying its own way in patience. So the ledger of tonight is closed. We know why up is hard. We know who managed it. We know what it bought us. And we know how it might be done again, which clears the stage for the last act. And for the question that has been waiting underneath this whole video since the opening minute. We keep saying up and out of the plane in one breath, as if they were the same thing. As if the flat solar system were a room, and climbing out of the disk meant leaving through the ceiling. That was the promise hiding inside the very first image tonight. All that clean, empty space above the planets, the open door, the short way out. It is time to test that promise. And I will warn you now, of everything this night has broken. This is the piece I suspect you are most attached to. Go back to the very first minutes of tonight and look at what that opening picture quietly sold you. The solar system, viewed from the side. Everything humanity has ever known pressed into a thin sheet of light. And above the sheet, emptiness. Clean and open and infinite. Nobody had to say the next thought out loud, because your mind supplied it on its own. That is the exit. The planets are the crowd. The plane is the crowded room. And up is the open door standing right there in the ceiling. Surely a ship that made the great turn, that paid the terrible bill and climbed out of the disk, would be leaving the solar system by the shortest road there is. Straight up and gone. Here is the problem with that thought. And it is the final trap of the night. The disk is a map of where the planets are. It was never a map of what the sun holds. Those are two completely different things. And everything in Chapter 5 already proved it. If we had been paying attention, the sun's gravity does not live in the disk. The sun's gravity fills a sphere, reaching outward in every direction equally. Up and down and sideways all alike. Fading with distance, but never caring one bit about angles. The flat solar system is just where the furniture happens to sit inside that sphere. The sphere itself has no floor, no ceiling, no thin spots, no open door. Climb straight up out of the plane and you are not slipping out through a gap in the sun's grip. You are simply moving through a different part of the same grip. And the grip up there is exactly as strong as it is down on the floor at the same distance. Let me make that concrete, because it deserves to be felt. Suppose our old ship, Ascent, somehow wins everything tonight. The turn gets made, the bill gets paid, and the ship climbs gloriously, vertically, out of the disk, rising until it stands as high above the plane as Neptune sits far along it. Billions of kilometers of pure altitude. Every planet, every asteroid, every scrap of ordinary traffic lies far below. By the logic of the opening picture, the ship has left. It is through the door, out of the room, gone. Now check the physics instead of the picture. At that height, the ship sits a certain distance from the sun, and the sun pulls on it with exactly the force it applies to anything at that distance. No discount for altitude. No weakening for being above the crowd. If the ship is not moving fast enough to escape, and after spending everything on the turn, it is nowhere near that fast, then the sun's pull owns it. As completely as it owns any comet, any asteroid, any world. The ship's path bends. The climb becomes an arc. The arc becomes an orbit. And our triumphant escapee settles into an enormous, slow, tilted loop around the sun, circling the star from high above the planetary disk. Forever. It left the map. It never left the territory. That sentence is worth repeating, because it is the deepest twist in this whole story. You can leave the map without leaving the territory. The disk, the floor, the flat neighborhood. All of it is just the drawing of where things are. The territory is the sun's sphere of control. And that sphere extends above the plane exactly as far as it extends along it. Hundreds of times, Neptune's distance in every direction. An empire of gravity with no short side. Measured against the territory. Up is no shortcut. Up is just another direction inside the empire. No closer to the border than sideways ever was. And considerably more expensive to travel. And if you want proof that direction was never what escape is about, this channel has already given it to you. In another story, on another night. Voyager 1, the farthest machine our species has ever flown, is leaving the solar system right now, permanently. And it is doing so on a path tilted about 35 degrees out of the plane. A diagonal. Nowhere near straight up. Its brother, Voyager 2, is leaving too. Slanting down below the floor on the tilt, Neptune handed it. And it is just as gone. Meanwhile, our imaginary Ascent climbing at a perfect 90 degrees. Magnificently vertical. Stays trapped in the sun's empire forever. Two ships leave on a slant. One ship stays while pointing at the exit. The difference between them was never their angle. It was speed. Pure and simple. The voyagers carry enough velocity that the sun can never pull their paths closed into a loop. And Ascent, after paying for its beautiful turn, does not. Escape has no favorite direction. Escape is a speed limit, and you either exceed it or you belong to the sun. No matter which way your nose points. No matter how empty the sky ahead of you looks. So the great turn, the whole grand project of tonight, buys something real. But be precise about what. It buys a new point of view. It does not buy freedom. A polar orbit around the sun is still an orbit around the sun. A leash worn at a different angle. And the open room above the planets turns out to be part of the same house. Which raises one last honest question. The question the whole geography of tonight now demands. If the flat solar system is only the furniture, and the sun's empire is the true territory, then how far does the flatness itself actually go? Where does the disk end? Is the solar system a thin sheet, all the way to the border? Or does the neighborhood change shape somewhere out there in the dark? It changes shape. Farther out. The flat world does something almost nobody knows about. Something strange and beautiful. And it is nearly the last place tonight will take us. For this leg of the journey, pull the camera back. Farther than we have gone all night. Let the sun shrink to a bright point. Let the orbits of the planets tighten into rings around it. And watch what happens to the flatness itself as the neighborhood rolls past beneath us. Close in, where we have spent the whole night. The flatness is almost perfect. 8 planets. Their moons. The asteroid belt. All of it disciplined. All of it pressed into the sheet. Every orbit within a few degrees of the floor. This is the tidy downtown of the solar system. The part every classroom model gets right. And it stays tidy all the way out to Neptune. Then cross Neptune's orbit. And feel the neighborhood begin to loosen. Out here lies the Kuiper Belt. The ring of frozen worlds where Pluto lives. And the discipline starts to slip. Pluto rides an orbit, tilted 17 degrees off the floor. And among its icy neighbors that is nothing unusual. Some swing 20 degrees off the plane. Some 30. A scattered population of drifters on slanted, stretched out paths. Less like cars in orderly lanes and more like moths around a porch light. The sheet is still recognizable out here, but it is thickening at the edges, fraying, as if the pages of the flat solar system were beginning to curl. Keep going, though, because the real transformation waits much farther out, and the evidence for it comes falling into our sky on its own. Every so often, a comet arrives in the inner solar system that no astronomer has ever seen before, on an orbit thousands of years long. And here is the detail that matters tonight. These long-haul comets do not arrive along the floor. They fall in from everywhere. Some drop steeply from high above the plane. Some climb from far below it. Some cross at angles that respect no map we own. Track enough of them. Trace each path backward to the deep space it came from. And the arrival directions spray across the entire sky, evenly, with no preference for the plane whatsoever. In 1950, a Dutch astronomer named Jan Oort sat down with exactly that evidence and drew the only conclusion the geometry allows. If the visitors come from every direction equally, then the place they come from must surround us in every direction equally. Way out there, in the darkness far beyond the planets. The sun is holding an immense reservoir of sleeping comets. Trillions of them, arranged in nothing flat at all, arranged in a shell, a vast sphere of drifting ice, wrapped around the entire solar system, above it and below it, and all sides at once. We call it the Oort cloud. And if you have spent other nights with this channel, you have met it once before, from a different angle. In our Voyager story, the Oort cloud was the endless suburb that a spacecraft crawling outward along the floor would need 30,000 years to cross. Tonight, you finally get to see its shape. It begins hundreds of times farther out than the planets, and it extends, by some estimates, a noticeable fraction of the way to the next star. And it is round. The flat solar system, the disk that ruled every chapter of tonight, turns out to be the small, bright, busy center of something whose true outer form is a sphere. Picture it honestly now. The whole estate at once. A thin, glowing vinyl record of planets, spinning at the middle of a colossal dim snow globe. The record 1,000 times smaller than the globe that holds it. Why the shape changes is a story of weakening control. Down in the inner solar system, the sun's grip is strong, and the memory of the original spinning birth disk is law. So, everything stays flat. But the Oort cloud rides the far edge of the sun's empire, so distant that sunlight out there is just another star's glimmer, and the sun's hold, while real, is gentle. Gentle enough that over 4.5 billion years, other hands have stirred the region. The slow tide of the galaxy itself, the passing tugs of neighboring stars, each faint disturbance nudging the sleeping comets a little, tilting orbits degree by degree across the ages, until whatever flatness the outer cloud once had was stirred away completely. The disk is what the sun's authority looks like, where that authority is absolute. The sphere is what it looks like, where the galaxy has begun, softly, to have opinions. And that reshapes the meaning of the question we started with. One last time. All night we have talked about flying up as if up were a permanent feature of the sky, a fixed direction stamped on the universe. Now you can see its actual borders. Up exists downtown. Up is a local convention, drawn perpendicular to a local floor, and it carries real meaning only as long as there is a floor beneath you to measure from. Fly far enough out, into the realm of the snow globe, where frozen wanderers circle the sun at every angle and no plane holds any privilege. And the floor that defined our entire night simply fades from the neighborhood. You could still draw the old plane on your charts out there, extend it as a line of mathematics, but the sky around you would no longer honor it. No floor, no perpendicular, no perpendicular. And up quietly loses its special meaning, dissolving into a sky that is the same in every direction. The way a compass needle goes aimless when you finally stand on the pole itself, the hard direction, it turns out, was never written into the universe. It was written into our address. We live on the floor of a flat downtown, inside a round estate, and up was only ever the word for the one road out of town that the traffic of our birth made almost too expensive to take. Almost because machines have taken it anyway. And you have met them tonight. But before we return to the launch pad and close this story, there is one more secret about our address. The last one. And it is the strangest of all. All night we have treated our floor as the level ground of this story. The flat reference. Everything else tilts against. It is time someone told you the truth about the floor itself. The floor is crooked, all night long. We have trusted one thing completely. The floor. Every chapter of tonight has leaned on it. We measured up against it. We priced the great turn away from it. We watched Ulysses climb out of it and solar orbiter pry itself loose from it a few degrees at a time. The plane of the solar system has been our level ground, our sea level, the flat truth underneath the whole story. So, before we go back to the launch pad and finish, you deserve to know the last secret in the geography of tonight. Our floor is not level either. Here is what I mean. The solar system is not floating alone in a void. It lives inside something enormously larger. The Milky Way galaxy, a city of several 100 billion stars. And the Milky Way, it turns out, has the same figure our own neighborhood has. It is flat. The galaxy is a disk, 100,000 light years across. All those stars and clouds of gas wheeling around a center the way our planets wheel around the sun. You have seen this disk with your own eyes. On any dark summer night, far from city lights. As that soft band of light arching overhead that we call the Milky Way. That band is the galaxy's floor, seen edge on, from the inside. The same trick of perspective that turned our solar system into a thin line at the start of tonight. Flatness, it seems, runs in the family. Spinning things settle into disks, whether they are the size of a solar system or the size of a galaxy. And we happen to live inside one disk that is riding around inside another. So here is the natural next thought. And it feels almost obligatory. Surely the two floors line up. Surely our little vinyl record lies flat on the galaxy's great turntable, to level with the city it lives in. The small pattern echoing the big one. It would be so tidy. It does not line up. Measure the angle between the plane of our solar system and the plane of the Milky Way. And the answer comes back at about 60 degrees. 60. Our whole flat neighborhood. The floor we have spent this entire night trying to escape is itself pitched over at a steep slant inside the galaxy, closer to standing on its edge than to lying down. Picture the galaxy as a vast, level ballroom floor, and picture our solar system as a coin someone dropped on it. A coin that landed propped against a crumb, leaning at a sharp angle, and then just stayed that way for 4.5 billion years. Every planet, every orbit, every launch pad, and every mission we have described tonight rides that tilted coin. The floor of our house is a crooked shelf in somebody else's house. Why the slant? Because nobody ever leveled it. When our solar system condensed out of its spinning cloud 4.5 billion years ago, the direction of that spin was an accident of local history, set by the swirls and collisions inside one particular clump of one particular gas cloud. The galaxy had its grand rotation, and our little cloud had its own private one. And the two had no reason to agree. Look across the galaxy today, and you find the same story everywhere. Astronomers have now mapped planetary systems around thousands of other stars, and their disks lean at every angle imaginable, each one tilted by the accident of its own birth. A ballroom floor littered with coins, dropped every which way. There is no level in the universe. There are only local floors, each one convinced it is flat, each one crooked from every other floor's point of view. And this puts one final frame around everything you have heard tonight. The up we spent the whole night pricing. The up that cost 42 kilometers per second. The up Ulysses bought at Jupiter is our up, drawn square against our tilted coin. The galaxy has a different up, drawn against the ballroom floor. And the two disagree by 60 degrees. Which means, and I love this detail, that a spacecraft climbing heroically out of our solar system's plane is, from the galaxy's point of view, mostly just moving sideways along a slightly different slant. If you spent tonight with our Voyager story, you have already seen where that leads. Out at the galactic scale. Every road any machine of ours can travel bends into the same great orbit around the center of the Milky Way. And the galaxy files our proudest vertical climbs under miscellaneous local traffic. Every floor is somebody else's wall. Every ceiling is somebody else's ramp. Up never stops being real, but it never stops being local either. All the way out. As far as the maps go, do not let that shrink tonight. Though, let it sharpen it, because it means the question this whole video asked was never about geometry in the sky. The sky has no opinion. It was about us, about where we happened to be standing, about the particular tilted coin our species was born, riding, and the particular sideways inheritance it handed every machine we ever built. Other civilizations, if they exist on other coins, face their own version of this exact problem. At their own angles, with their own expensive directions. The physics is universal, the floor is personal. And with that, the map of tonight is finally complete. A flat downtown, a round estate, a crooked coin on a galactic ballroom floor, and one small species, standing on the coin, that spent 50 years learning to step off it. There is only one place left to go. Back to the beginning. Back to the pad. Come back to the launch pad from the opening of tonight. Same imaginary ship. Same nose aimed at the empty sky above the solar system. Same one-line mission. Fly straight up, out of the plane, and keep going. At the start of the night, you looked at that ship and saw a simple contest. The ship against gravity. The ship against distance. The ship against some invisible ceiling that had somehow kept our whole species pinned to a flat sheet for 70 years of spaceflight. Now look at the same ship with tonight behind you and see the contest as it really is. There is no ceiling. There never was one. The door above the solar system has stood open since before the Earth cooled, and the sun would let any traveler through it without objection. The opponent was never up there at all. The opponent came bolted to the ship on the day it was built, riding quietly in its bones, 30 kilometers every second, sideways, the inheritance every machine receives from the moving Earth and none can refuse. Turning that inheritance at Earth's speed, in Earth's neighborhood, costs more than the ship's entire velocity. 42 kilometers per second for the full right angle. Better than 3 times the price of leaving the solar system forever. Straight out. The exit is cheap. The left turn is what breaks you. And you now know every way that turn has ever been paid. Pay it with fuel alone and the arithmetic eats the ship. Tang bitang. Until the design dies on the whiteboard. Pay it with a planet and it can truly be done. Ulysses ran 1 billion kilometers the wrong way and let Jupiter make the whole turn in one colossal favor. And it bought the summit. A real polar orbit. At the price of distance and blindness, Solar Orbiter is paying on installments right now, borrowing a few degrees from Venus at every pass, keeping its telescopes close enough to finally photograph the top and bottom of our star, or pay in years. The whisper of an ion engine, the endless lean of sunlight on a sail, patience, standing in for muscle, fuel, favors, or time, 3 currencies, 1 unforgiving ledger, and half a century of spaceflight has never found a 4th. Even the winnings came with fine print. And tonight you read all of it. Reach the high country and you cannot stop there, because there is no balcony over the sun. Only orbits that visit the view and sweep on. Climb out of the disk entirely, and you still have not left. Because the disk was only the furniture, and the sun's true estate is a sphere with no thin side. Travel far enough toward the edge of that estate, and the floor itself fades from the sky. Out where the flat world curls into a snow globe of drifting ice. And the floor you started from was never level to begin with. Just one crooked coin on the galaxy's ballroom floor. It's up, drawn at a private angle no one else in the Milky Way shares. So why did we do it? Why spend 50 years and 2 generations of careers stepping off the coin? You know that answer now too. And it is not poetry. The high ground above the sun is the watchtower. It is the one seat where a storm aimed at this planet crosses the sky instead of charging the camera. The one angle that reads the polar magnetism where the next solar cycle is quietly being decided, somewhere down the road. A forecast built on that view is going to catch a storm like the one that broke Quebec. Early, cleanly, days out. And some grid is going to ride it out with the lights on, because 2 stubborn missions spent decades buying altitude. The climb was never for the view alone. The climb was insurance, written in degrees of tilt. So, here is the final picture of the night. Hold it as long as you like. The solar system, seen from the side. One thin blade of light in the dark. Above it, high above the plane, a single small machine, higher than any world. The whole flat kingdom of the planet spread out below it. It looks free. It looks like the picture we wanted at the start of tonight. The escapee. The one that made it through the ceiling. Now watch it long enough. The way tonight has taught you to watch and see the truth in its path. The path is curving, gently, patiently, enormously. The way everything out there curves, bending around the same star as every planet beneath it. Even at the top of the sky, the ship still belongs to the sun. It did not break out of the solar system. It found a higher seat inside it. And maybe that was the real prize all along. Because from that seat, and from nowhere else, you can finally see the whole neighborhood at once. The disk, the floor, the little blue groove where every launch pad ever built goes sweeping around the sun at 30 kilometers every second. There was never a ceiling above the solar system. There was only 30 kilometers per second of sideways motion, and the enormous price of turning it. One more thought before you sleep. This Christmas Eve, while the presents sit under the trees, a real spacecraft will be sweeping past Venus, collecting the next few degrees of the climb. One more step up a staircase. Our species only learned to build in your lifetime. Nobody will feel it happen. The planet pays quietly. But the climb is real, and it is happening now. And somewhere above the sun there is a view of our whole flat world that gets a little clearer every year. If tonight changed the way you see that flat world, or the sky standing open above it, a like and a subscribe genuinely help this channel keep making nights like this one. But that can wait until morning. Good night to you. Good night to the little ship on the stairway. And good night to the floor of the solar system. Still turning. Still carrying all of us. Sideways. Together,